Fool in you screams. William Shakespeare said that a fool thinks he is wise, but a wise man knows himself to be a fool. A fool is not always a character that makes people laugh at his foolishness. Rather, in various roles, it represents the free will that every human soul craves. Someone who breaks the status quo and goes against authority. The fool emerges as one of the global narrative's most relatable, irresistible, and enduring characters. We engage with folly by witnessing it in others and the world around us, sometimes even willingly showcasing it within ourselves. It's a lasting archetype, something we all inherently acquire from the moment we step into this world. Many of us struggle with the absence of the fool in our lives. In our hectic and earnest pursuits, we often take ourselves too seriously, striving diligently to fit into a world that praises workaholism, efficiency, and productivity, ultimately leading us to mere parts in a vast machine. Neglecting the fundamental human need for playfulness, we grapple with boredom and exhaustion, losing connection with spontaneity, authenticity, and passion. The remedy lies in granting the fool archetype its rightful place in our lives. There must be instances where humans should completely submit their rationality, seriousness, and coldness to the fools in them, to see what a fool can do when unleashed again and again. It's because even the wisest of humans acknowledges the limits of knowledge and isn't opposed to the occasional self-deprecating laugh. The fool's character is subtle, with various attributes linked to it. Sometimes it is dull-witted, inarticulate, incapable of conforming to conventional standards, yet possessing a natural simplicity and innocence of heart. In other instances, his wits outpace that of philosophers because his imagination and capabilities are not prone to be limited by barriers. The term fool traces its origins to the Latin follis, signifying a pair of bellows expelling empty air, suggesting an empty-headed individual with insubstantial thoughts. Concurrently, akin to bellows providing oxygen for combustion, the fool holds the power to fire us up. In 1511, the Dutch scholar Erasmus presented In Praise of Folly, a work that garnered immense popularity and explained deeply the role of the fool in Western literature. Personifying folly, Erasmus introduces her, praising the indispensable role she plays in preventing life from becoming mundane. Criticizing everyone, the work, despite warnings from Erasmus' close friends regarding the potential dangers of attacking the church, found amusement even among religious figures. According to Erasmus, friendship and marriage inherently contain an element of folly. In these relationships, we frequently overlook the flaws of our friends and loved ones, deeming them small vices in comparison to the perceived shortcomings of others. Intellectuals demonstrate a certain folly in their dedicated pursuit of knowledge, dedicating years to library visits and research, firmly convinced that their endeavors bear immense importance. They anticipate that a select group of fellow intellectuals, possibly over the course of a century, will read their book and hold it in high regard. Folly draws a parallel between philosophers and theatre critics, comparing them to individuals who unmask characters on stage, ultimately spoiling the actors' performances. Philosophers, often viewed as dull and irritating, seem oblivious to the utility of illusions that make life bearable, even if they distort reality. On the other hand, the fool appears infinitely freer and happier than those burdened by wisdom, becoming the life of the party. Motivated by their lack of wisdom to craft lies and manipulate others, fools always speak the truth. Essentially, the joy that comes with laughter and play is unparalleled in making life happier. Folly is not only universal, but considered necessary and desirable for humanity. Being a person involves playing the fool and recognizing this is the pinnacle of wisdom. But then comes the character of the wise fool. The fool represents a nostalgic return to a simpler way of life, a wisdom derived not from the mind, but from the heart. Sometimes the down-to-earth and simple-minded, in their purity of heart, can uncover profound truths that dodge those burdened with learning and convention. It's like sensing a more resonant truth in popular proverbs, than in rational exposition. Russian writer Fyodor Dostoevsky says, "The wisest of all, in my opinion, is he who can, if only once a month, call himself a fool, a faculty unheard of nowadays." In literature, wise characters occasionally portray insanity, and madmen express wisdom. The oxymoron wise fool represents a literal paradox, where a character identified as a fool comes to be regarded as the possessor of wisdom. Sometimes individuals accuse wise people of insanity to conceal their unwelcome wisdom, either fearing harsh words on controversial topics or simply punishing them for bold speech. The archetypal wise fool is Socrates. His educational method involved exposing the folly of the supposedly wise, and he claimed that his own wisdom stemmed from an awareness of his ignorance. Knowledge of ignorance is, in itself, a kind of knowledge. In Plato's Apology, Socrates says, "For I was conscious that I knew practically nothing, and also, I neither know nor think that I know." Here, a fool is not someone who knows nothing, but someone who underestimates his cognitive capabilities and likes to call himself a fool. That's why, historically, the fools are the only characters who play their roles as truth-tellers. There are two ways to be fooled: believing what isn't true or refusing to believe what is true. When an uncomfortable truth needs to be spoken, and those in power are hesitant to address it, it's often the fool who steps in. There's something heroic about this. The fool is the one who speaks a truth nobody else dares to utter, bringing instant relief because people know it has to be said. Generally, we can categorize fools into two types: the natural fool, lacking social awareness, who occasionally utters the truth without regard for social conventions, and the professional fool, whose job is to make harsh truths more digestible by disguising them with humor and wit. One follows the heart, the other the mind. Surprisingly, the greatest fools are often cleverer than those who laugh at them. The fool is fearless in speaking the truth. In fact, the great secret of the successful fool is that he is no fool at all. As the visionary artist William Blake writes, "If the fool would persist in his folly, he would become wise." But then we see other characters of the fool, who is a clown and a trickster. They serve as sources of humor, inevitably prompting laughter and acting as catalysts for comic catharsis. However, they also embody duality: folly and non-folly, order and disorder. What may seem like a joke can in fact be a warning. Danish theologian and philosopher Søren Kierkegaard writes, "A fire broke out backstage in a theatre. The clown came out to warn the public. They thought it was a joke and applauded. He repeated it. The acclaim was even greater." I think that's just how the world will come to an end, to general applause from wits who believe it's a joke. Professional fools can bring awareness to what is happening in the world and where we are headed. However, many of them come from a place of tragedy. The contradictory association between comedy and mental disorders, such as depression and anxiety, is known as the sad clown paradox, where comedy acts as a defense mechanism to remove suppressed feelings of rage and aggression. People may respond with laughter at the clown, yet hold feelings of pity, fear, or repulsion. Some people, in fact, suffer from coulrophobia, which is the overwhelming fear of clowns. In this day and age, clowns are a constant source of horror in books and movies. Perhaps this is because the modern clown's role is always the same: to entertain others by being the subject of laughter, and he is not always successful at it. The clown has to sacrifice his well-being by always having to put on the same face and play the same character. This one-sidedness can take a toll mentally, and the clown slowly becomes enveloped by his shadow, the dark side of his personality. The evil clown archetype is best exemplified in the Joker, one of popular culture's most recognizable villain characters. In medieval theatre, clowns wouldn't just make spectators laugh. Still, they would sometimes also snatch them away into a hellmouth, the entrance to hell envisioned as the gaping mouth of a monster, terrifying the audiences. Thus, their light and dark sides were balanced. The fool and the trickster have a few psychological differences as well. Generally speaking, the fool is portrayed as an innocent or naive figure who wouldn't hurt a fly. while the trickster is intentionally deceptive and seeks to trick others and laugh at them. The trickster loves engaging in what the Germans call Schadenfreude, which literally means harm joy, in which one derives pleasure from learning or witnessing the misfortunes, failures, or humiliation of another person. A trickster may console others when they fail and hide that internally he feels joy. When there is an opportunity to play a trick on another person, the trickster immediately seizes the opportunity. The fool, however, is not interested in laughing at a person, but rather laughing with the person, or laughing at himself. Laughing at oneself helps to break the ice, because it not only removes one's own persona, but also the audience's social mask, allowing for genuine behavior. This courageous feat throws one into a vulnerable state, allowing others to open up and receive a profound message. While the fool likes to entertain others and is usually the butt of a joke, the trickster, on the other hand, seeks primarily to entertain himself, even if it is at the expense of others. The fool can have a sense of humor even in difficult situations, radiating hope in others. In a tense atmosphere, the hurt person takes the risk of making a joke, even if it means making a fool of himself, not just to set himself at ease, but also to bring relief to others. When a person acts like a fool through some kind of outward action, it is immediately apparent to the audience. With the trickster, it is more ambiguous. He plays like a fool to make people fall into his trap. Then comes the role of the notorious medieval court fool. During medieval times, the court fool had the responsibility of entertaining the aristocracy through music, storytelling, satire, comedy, or skills like juggling and acrobatics. The belief endured that having a fool in the vicinity warded off the evil eye. This isn't just an outdated superstition, it signifies an enduring psychological truth. Placing the fool out front, where we can keep an eye on him, is generally a good idea. We need to make space for the betrayer factor within ourselves and welcome him into our inner circle, where he can bring fresh ideas and new energy. Without the fool's candid observations and playfulness, our inner contemplation might turn into a sterile wasteland. During the Middle Ages, the lower clergy celebrated the Feast of Fools on New Year's Day. To guard the society against unexpected outbreaks of latent destructive urges, all conventions were temporarily suspended. The natural order of things was inverted, sacred rituals were imitated in an obscene manner, church authorities were ridiculed, and all underdogs were permitted to release year-long repressions of hostility, lust, and rebellion. It presented a picture where the whole society became fools, discovering their inner capabilities by letting go of the social masks they had worn for so long. However, the church eventually drove these blasphemous celebrations underground. The fool also played a significant role in the royal court and was granted permission by the king to speak the truth. Straddling the line between insider and outsider, the fool held a peculiar position at court, being the one person capable of humorously ridiculing the very person he served. But that's when the fool becomes a threat to the power-holding authority. Anyone who dares to challenge others or the status quo is deemed a fool by those too afraid to speak out, unwilling to risk their reputation by being authentic. To showcase their special privileges, fools mimic the king's crown and scepter with cap and bells and a bauble, or fool's rod. Like a ventriloquist's doll, the miniature head of the bauble could utter things that the fool might hesitate to say himself. Due to their close relationship with the king, fools were immune from punishment and could speak without fear. Nevertheless, some pushed the boundaries too far and met the fate of beheading. Fools embody values rejected by the group because they defy social norms and rules. Perceived as incompetent, they are often ostracized for their rebelliousness, making them social misfits. However, every group needs such a figure, as they serve as agents of change, and the vitality of culture demands space for figures whose role is to unveil and disrupt the very foundations upon which cultures are built. Court fools typically had some form of physical deformity, originating from impoverished backgrounds and burdened financially. They found employment as natural fools for amusement due to their unique physical attributes. Deformities were considered a special mark of the Lord, leading to the selection of dwarfs, hunchbacks, and similar individuals as fools in royal households. Dwarfs, in particular, held significant value and were often presented as gifts to fellow royals. Placed strategically next to the king, they created an optical illusion, making him appear larger and enhancing his authoritative presence. Despite their physical challenges, these individuals demonstrated exceptional depth and wisdom. Excluded from typical activities and interests, their loneliness and suffering compelled them to discover inner reservoirs of strength. In Shakespeare's tragedy, King Lear, the king's relationship with the fool is one characterized by friendship and dependency. Left alone with his knights, the king becomes a profoundly lonely figure, consistently inquiring about the fool's whereabouts. Desiring the fool's constant companionship as an alter ego, the king expects the fool to challenge conventional power dynamics, occupying a paradoxical position of virtual outlawry while depending entirely on the support of his social group. Similar to their counterparts in the era, Shakespearean fools employ wit to outshine those of higher social standing, their characteristics exaggerated for dramatic effect. The myth of Parsifal, an ancient Arthurian legend, narrates the transformative journey from boyhood to manhood. Named Parsifal, or the young fool, he resides with his mother and, intrigued by passing knights, decides to leave his mother to become a knight himself. Enduring trials that mark his initiation into manhood, Parsifal encounters the troubled Grail Castle, where the Fisher King, the ruler, is severely wounded. His profound injuries render him incapable of living or dying, symbolizing the manifestation of psychological wounds in external problems. Every adolescent experiences a Fisher King wound, symbolizing the transition from naive to self-consciousness. The painful realization that the world is not solely filled with joy and happiness marks an adolescent's growth. However, this initial encounter with a wound becomes the catalyst for redemption later in life. In knightly ceremonies at the Grail Castle, a maiden holds the Holy Grail filled with wine, granting the deepest wishes of those who partake. The Fisher King, however, abstains, suffering alone. When our inward capacity is wounded, no outward effort can remedy the situation. An intense form of suffering, being in the presence of beauty, happiness, and holiness, yet unable to partake. The court fool's ancient prophecy foresaw the healing of the Fisher King when an innocent fool arrived and posed a specific question. One day, Parsifal encounters a man fishing on a lake. It is the Fisher King. Seeking lodgings for the night, Parsifal turned to the Fisher King for guidance, who then directed him to the Grail Castle. Engaging in the ceremony, Parsifal witnessed the Fisher King groaning in agony, isolated in his suffering. Despite his mother's advice cautioning against excessive questioning, Parsifal, donned in the homespun garment crafted by his mother, disregarded the counsel of his godfather figure and abstained from talking with the Fisher King. Upon leaving the castle the next day, he discovered its disappearance upon turning around. Rediscovering the elusive Grail Castle became a 20-year odyssey for Parsifal. The original myth concludes here. The inner castle exists perpetually, but remains invisible unless perceived with a fresh perspective. Numerous continued narratives assert that upon Parsifal's return to the Grail Castle, he posed a query to the Fisher King. Whom does the Grail serve? This inquiry led to instantaneous healing, ushering in an era of peace and happiness across the land. The Grail, symbolizing the central meaning in human life, underscores that life's purpose lies in serving the Grail or higher self. Jungian analyst Robert A. Johnson posits, a man must consent to look to a foolish, innocent, adolescent part of himself for his cure. The inner fool is the only one who can touch his Fisher King wound. In Miguel de Cervantes' Don Quixote, often hailed as the first modern novel, the protagonist succumbs to madness after immersing himself in numerous chivalric books. Assuming the role of Don Quixote, he endeavors to defend the innocent and defeat the wicked, only to achieve the opposite. Driven by an idealized peasant woman, Don Quixote's quixotic pursuits reflect a tendency to be deluded, unable to distinguish reality from imagination, and pursue impractical, romantic ideals. The iconic scene where he tilts at windmills, mistaking them for giants, gave rise to the idiom tilting at windmills, signifying the act of attacking imaginary enemies. Enlisting Sancho Panza as his sidekick and squire, Don Quixote's lofty fantasies bewilder the down-to-earth peasant. Motivated by promises of great wealth, Sancho's realism sharply contrasts with his master's idealism. Don Quixote's well-intentioned actions often lead to harm as he struggles to perceive the world as it truly is. Despite moments of apparent sanity, especially when avoiding chivalrous discussions, his insanity prevails, serving as a cautionary reminder that even the most intelligent individuals can succumb to their own folly. As Don Quixote nears the conclusion of his journey, he falls ill and descends into sleep, only to awaken from a dream and subsequently from his state of madness. A harsh reality dawns upon him, realizing that he has squandered away his life and is now perceived as simply insane. The novel's tone undergoes a shift from comedy to tragedy, evoking pity from those who had once regarded him with disdain. They contend that he is not delusional, but genuinely a knight. What was once classified as insanity is now reinterpreted as sanity. With the lavishness of his life-sustaining illusions, he succumbs to death, a consequence of an overdose of reality. This raises the pivotal question: is it better to be aware of the truth and endure unhappiness, or to live in a fool's paradise? Dostoevsky delves into this inquiry in his novel, The Idiot. In The Idiot, he portrays the ideal man as a positively beautiful individual in a morally corrupt and decaying world. The protagonist, Prince Mishkin, returns to Russia after undergoing treatment for epilepsy and idiocy in a Swiss sanatorium. Setting himself apart from other virtuous fools in fiction, Mishkin emphasizes innocence over comicality. His open-heartedness, innocence, and lack of social experience serve as tools of satire against the corrupted, cold, money-hungry, manipulative, and egocentric society surrounding him. Despite being labeled an idiot, he possesses profound insights into human nature and true Christianity. In contrast to Mishkin, Hippolyte represents the antithesis, a young atheist and nihilist in the advanced stages of tuberculosis. Rebelling against society, nature, and God, Hippolyte asserts, "It is better to be unhappy and know the worst than to be happy in a fool's paradise." Mishkin, however, struggles to comprehend why someone would willingly choose unhappiness. We also see the evolution of fools in history. The Visconti Sforza tarot, originating from the 15th century and believed to be the oldest surviving cards, portrays the fool as a beggar or vagabond in tattered clothes and stockings, barefoot and carrying a stick, adorned with feathers, a possible reference to the wild man concept. In the Solabusca tarot from the late 15th century, the fool wears a feathered headdress and plays a bagpipe, while the German Hofamterspiel of the 15th century depicts a barefooted fool playing a bagpipe, dressed in a robe with bells on his hood, reminiscent of a court fool. In the Mantegna tarocchi from the same century, the fool appears as a semi-naked old man leaning on a stick. An animal competes for his attention, illustrating the fool's close connection to his instinctual side, allowing his animal nature to guide his steps. It's an established reality that nothing would initiate without the fool. Inventors and geniuses have almost always been regarded as no better than fools at the beginning of their careers, and very frequently at the end of them as well. Shoshin is a Zen Buddhist concept conveying the idea of a beginner's mind, contrasting with closed-mindedness and the belief in one's expertise. The beginner's mind holds numerous possibilities, while the expert's mind is limited in scope. Open-mindedness can foster the cultivation of silence, creating the necessary space for the mysterious experience of the other world. If you can't listen to what someone next to you is saying, you won't hear the voice of silence. The potential of our five senses is vast, but our lack of it limits its refinement. Jung writes, "The soul demands your folly, not your wisdom." Embarking on a journey of self-discovery is traditionally deemed foolish. Society often expects adherence to a linear path: education, work, marriage, and so on. Deviating from this path brands an individual as a fool, with their adventures perceived as leading only to poverty and misery. The first step is usually the hardest and most crucial. The fool envisions the wonderful adventures that lie ahead and is less concerned about making mistakes. Thinking on one's feet, being energetic, and urging others to live life to the fullest are qualities associated with the fool, while excessive thinking leads to overcaution and stagnation. Fear of uncertainty often paralyzes us. To avoid the suffering of anticipation, we might prefer experiencing failure over sacrificing potential success. Overthinking creates anxiety, and one may suffer more in imagination than in reality. Failure, however, can open doors to unforeseen success. Yet, there is a dark side to the fool. While the fool possesses numerous positive traits, there's a potential downside. Stubbornness hinders reflection. The fool might linger on the edge, neglecting to ponder his direction, risking a fall off the cliff. Occasionally, our inner protective voice transforms into a judgmental, self-perpetuating force, cautioning, "Be careful, you'll make a fool of yourself," or "That's a dumb question. Everyone will laugh and judge you." This fosters conformity and the dark side of the fool, leading to a preference for playing it safe, pursuing superficial pleasures, and seeking others' acceptance at the expense of genuine desires. Unawareness of the fool within can breed jealousy, resentment, shame, and other neuroses. In the journey toward individuation, the fool embodies both initiative and resistance, tethered to the archetype of eternal youth. This duality can either infuse adulthood with the energy, beauty, and creativity of childhood, or trap youth in unrealistic fantasies and a perception of life as a prison.